Learning through experience. I chose this title because that's basically what Joe's doing throughout the entire story of the Roundhouse, because he's still basically a child. He just became a teenager like a couple weeks before the story started. And there's a lot of times where we make connections before he does, so he's learning through experience, and we are learning through past or things we've heard before, and he is learning as he goes. Summary. On an Indian reservation in 1988, a 13-year-old boy named Joe lives with his judge father and genealogist mother. At the beginning of the story, Joe's mom is brutally raped and falls into a deep depression. Angrily that reservation police aren't solving his mother's case, Joe begins to look into it himself with the help of his friends. One day, Joe comes along a doll full of money and takes it to his Aunt Sonia, who takes him to create savings accounts. However, Sonia begins to use the money for herself. As more clues come out from Joe's mom, he realizes that the money he found was evidence, and eventually everyone, Joe included, puts together who the rapist is. Filled with anger and fear when he learns of the rapist's release, Joe creates and completes a plan to murder him. I feel like that is pretty self-explanatory. My first literary device is symbolism, and small trees had attacked my parents' house at the foundation. And this device is like, this symbolism shows that the family is starting to break apart, even before the things happen. Like, there's just clues there that something is going to happen and they're going to break apart, and it is shown. It's like he references the weeds multiple times throughout the book, and that's just like because there's that crack in the foundation that although it seems to be getting better, is not really, because it's hard to fix those cracks. Next one is irony. So when Sonia tells Joe to keep his mouth shut about the money, but then she starts to spend it herself, and like people start to notice that she has nicer stuff than she should. She's getting them into trouble when she's telling Joe not to. So that's the irony of the situation. And I think this just kind of shows that Sonia is not completely, like, she's just had that kind of life where she's not necessarily the best person. She tries to be sometimes, but she's not really the best person. Imagery. He had the car up past 90. We just flew. She vibrated with a steady shudder like a switch had been flipped inside. This just shows us the urgency of the scenes at the beginning of the book. Because, I mean, we can imagine a car going fast, but flying just adds an extra bit of urgency to the situation. And the switch flipping kind of shows that she's just suddenly changed, and he's not used to seeing her like this at all. And it helps make the situation seem a lot more urgent and scary. The lack of dialogue in the story kind of does, it helps it feel more like it really is just present time Joe telling the story of past Joe instead of just living through the experience. Because if he was talking, it would have felt like it was happening, and then with him just telling it, then we feel like we're hearing the story told to us, which is important because it is being told to us. It's his past, and he's learned from it, and he's not the same person he was as 13-year-old Joe. My first criticism is of the murder scene. The Marxist is the conflict between Joe and Lenin could be seen as a clash between the classes. Depending on which classes you are looking at, it differs who may be higher, but in the end it's especially hard to tell as Joe becomes a murderer. But any way you look at it, it's a battle between two worlds. feminist is the killing of Lyndon by Joe and the conflict in general is an effect of racism. Lyndon does not like Indians and violently rapes Joe's mother. Angry that this white man hurt his mother, Joe killed him. So, there's that. And then the note scene where Sonia leaves a note for Joe in the money box thing. The Marxist Sonia taking the money and leaving is a clear class conflict. Sonia even states that Joe may someday deserve how he grew up, creating a rift between their two childhoods. And feminist, Sonia was used as a sex object not only the entire novel, but her entire life. Taking the money was wrong, but she finally got out of that situation and started a new life. It just, that helps also show it's like, I think Sonia's just, she's had a hard life and has decided to give up on stuff. Text to World. This novel has a strong representation of Indians and their struggles with law on Indian reservations. Someone as dangerous as a rapist can walk free if the crime was off tribal lands, by a non-Indian, etc. Under any other law in America, the rapist would be arrested and put away as soon as they were identified. And I think that this is just a really huge thing because they're people just like we are. They live just like we do. They the only difference is maybe they have different things like traditions. They have different traditions that they do. They live in a different place than we do. That's about it. But their laws are different, even though we all live in America, and that it's just we get an easier chance at justice than they do, and that's this whole story is just kind of trying to tell us that that's wrong and that we should try to fix that for the reservations. The settings. The novel is set in an Indian reservation in North Dakota. The setting makes laws and interactions between residents different than that of other Americans, which I kind of covered in Text the World. The setting, it's like a small town. You know everybody. You're close to or not close. Like, you know everybody and you know how everybody is supposed to interact. Whereas in, other small towns are like that, but then in a lot of places in America, it's not like that. So, it's, you don't exactly, meet someone in a city like Fort Worth and find out later that they're your cousin. It's different here than it is in the reservations. My favorite quotes are, "Then the feathers took fire so the creature was consumed by light." The imagery of the crane being consumed by light is similar to that of a phoenix dying and being reborn, which is really cool to me. Like, his life is changing and his mom is kind of going, she was depressed and she was kind of hiding, and then eventually she comes back out and she's trying to be her old self, but she can't find that part of her, so she's kind of a new person. The other is a white cross on the Montana High Line. His physical departure is marked there, As for his spirit, I carry that around with me in the form of a round black stone. He gave it to me when he found out what had happened to my mother. Virgil Lafurnace? Sorry if I said that wrong. What's his name? Or Cappy. This quote from early on in the story tells us exactly what happens to a character at the end. The storytelling choice is fascinating since it allows the reader to know exactly what is about to happen. And when I was reading the end, that's all I could think about, and I think it's interesting that she did that, because it kind of, like how the no dialogue makes you really feel like it is you're hearing a story instead of experiencing a story. That's kind of what that does too. We passed over in a sweep of sorrow that would persist into our small forever. We just kept going. Even after Joe killed Lyndon, his family will not be the same as it was. They will be forever scarred from what happened over that summer. And I feel like that happens a lot for people, is they feel like if one thing goes back to the way it was, then everything will go back to the way it was, but that's not how everything works. So I think that it just connects with me in my life, so I think that's why I like that quote. But it also just shows that, Joe can't fix what happened, no matter how hard he tries. And if he thinks he does, sometimes something else happens that puts him down even more. The best thing for me to do was forget, and then for the rest of my life to try to and not think of how different things would have gone if in the first place I just followed Bugger's dream. Regret is to be expected in Joe's situation, and this quote illustrates the path now taken way of thinking that Joe could take in life. He is saying that he won't take this way, that he's going to try his best, but even now he's thinking, like, what if I had done that instead of what I did? Like, Lyndon would be alive and we would still, like, maybe even Cappy would be alive. I mean, you don't know. And it's just, if he takes that way in life, he's just going to be sad. But if he does what he says, and it's just the best thing for him to do is forget, then he has a chance of kind of redeeming himself, if not to other people that may think that he murdered Lyndon, and to himself. And you kind of need to redeem yourself to yourself if you want to be happy. I think that's what he was trying to do. My unique discovery is that the language in the story, I think this is the language in the story, the Chippewa, is still spoken by 50,000 people in the northern U.S. and southern Canada, and there are some children who are still raised to speak it today, and I just thought that was really cool because in the story it kind of sounded like it was dying, which I guess it is, because 50,000 people isn't really that much considering it's a language, but I think it's cool that some people are still raised to speak it today. And my final analysis is, overall it's an interesting and entertaining story, but it has some difficult to understand moments. Like, why did Joe take the doll to Sonia instead of someone else? Why did he decide to go to the extreme action of murder? And I would really love to read more of what happened in Joe's life, because how does murdering someone at 13 years old impact the rest of your life? I don't know how I would be able to handle it. I'd probably end up turning myself in, so I don't know how Joe could just keep it to himself for the rest of his life. Like, that's, I guess, like 70, 80 plus years that he has to keep a secret. I want to know what happened because I think it would be interesting.